My name's Taraneh Jahanpur. About Donald Trump. I hear that he's been bankrupted. What I know about him is that he professes to be a man of the people, but actually I've also heard that he comes from a very wealthy family, but that's as much as I know.
Oh, okay. Because my opening statement has three parts. One, I think that Donald Trump is an intuitive genius, but only in a few areas. Two, I think that he's an incompetent, idiotic, ignorant moron in most areas.
Yeah.
And three, if the Liberals can't work out how he's both, then they will never stop him.
How is he an intuitive genius?
It's only in maybe two areas. One, he's an intuitive genius at using his common sense, best judgment, intuition and instincts, his intuitive thought process, to target the only thing that turned out to matter, the common sense, best judgment, intuition and instincts of the American population. And so it didn't work on all of it, but it looks like about 1/3 to 1/2 of it is feeling with their best judgment, common sense and instincts that he's great and his policies are great, which is a bit worrying. And the other area that he's an intuitive genius is that he used his intuitive genius to set up a massive positive personal reputation. So, or if you want to be also neutral, a popularity index rating, or if you want to be negative, a cult of personality.
So do you think instincts are neutral, or do you think they veer towards good?
I don't know if they veer towards good. I would argue that your common sense, best judgment, intuition, and instincts, and your intuitive thought process are largely the same thing, and also largely the same thing as preconception, prejudice, and bias.
Okay. I would just want to actually take back what I said, rephrase it, because I think that instinct is a sort of animalistic response, whereas I think intuition can be a more spiritual response.
I had not thought of making that distinction. I was just thinking of intuitive thought process versus rational thought process.
Okay.
Although rational thought rationalizing and rational thought critical thought are different things. Because I find that with humans, normally they just common sense it instinctively and get to a conclusion, opinion, and then act on it. And then sometimes they'll common sense it to an opinion first, and then maybe they will rationalize. They'll think up arguments and find data to support what they had already common sensed, which is a problem because instead, really, they should do rational critical thought, which is both find data and think of arguments for, and also find data and think of arguments against what they had common sensed. Or they could have tried doing that instead of common sensing it in the first place.
Yeah. I'm not very good at critical thinking.
Okay.
I didn't really learn how to do it. And I work very much from my gut feelings.
Yeah.
I sort of think from my feelings.
Okay.
So how would you teach a person to think critically?
Well, first of all, you'd have to be aware that you've already had common sensed it, because that would be what you immediately felt.
Yeah.
So that's one problem. And then the other thing, and then you'd have to go and, if you're aware of that, you can park that conclusion somewhere, and then you have to go and try and think up what can I do to think up arguments against that and find data against it, and what can I do to think up arguments and find data against it, so for it and against it.
Yeah. So I have to prove my point of view, I have to disprove it, try to disprove it in a way.
As in both prove it and disprove it, as opposed to just prove it, because otherwise it will require someone else to point out any flaws in it. I mean, I could try testing you to see how you are. Okay. I'm trying to remember them. Think of a tune involving the G string. Right. Now, if you thought have you thought of the tune? But don't necessarily. Have you thought of the tune yet?
There's a song with the title that's something on the G string. Is that it?
I slightly phrased it slightly ambiguously. It was think of a tune involving the G string.
I wouldn't really know. I'd have to guess that most tunes have a G in it, right? You're talking about the G as in a note or played on a guitar?
That was the test bit, because I wanted to see whether you would simply common sense assume what sort of G string I was talking about.
Because also when you first asked me that, I thought of the underwear.
Yeah, that was the trap I was wondering if you would fall in. Because the answer, because I wanted to see. So, can you think of a tune which involves the G string?
The underwear?
I wasn't going to specify which one.
Have to.
I wasn't thinking of the G string musical note.
Thong.
Yeah, that was the one I was expecting most people to think of. The thing is, I hadn't thought of the G string musical note because I'm not quite sure whether I was thinking of. I'm not familiar with how that works. The one I was thinking of was air on the G string.
Yes, that's the second one. I was asking you. The song title has G string in it, but I couldn't remember the full title.
Yeah. Do you remember? Do you know how that song goes? That tune goes?
If you if you started it, I'd be able to join you.
Is that right?
I don't.
We could get our phones out and play it, but yeah, air is. So you know what type of music that is? Actually, do you remember how the song goes?
No, I don't remember how it goes.
Oh no. Well, anyhow, air on the G string. Air was done by J.S. Bach. Air on the G string was an arrangement by August Wilhelms.
Yeah.
So it's classical music.
Yeah.
And yeah, G string, because I didn't specify when I said tune involving the G string, that was the one I was seeing if you would go for it.
So how is that critical thinking? How are you testing critical thinking?
In that case, I was testing whether you would simply common sense what I meant by G string, because I didn't specify what sort of G string. So many people would have just common sense G string item of clothing, not G string the musical string.
Do you think that your perception that common sense is also subjective? Because
yes,
it all
usually
depends on how you see the world and how much G string in the underwear sense has entered your life compared to music, G string in the musical sense.
Yes. I mean, it also depends whether you were aware of the different terms or definitions. Or you might just think, well, normally that means G-string item of clothing, but does it have another definition I'm unaware of? It depends also whether your intuitive thought process or common sense is like normal human, or whether it's less or not, or whether it's impaired relative to normal humans.
So, my common sense, might be my process of thought and what I perceive as common sense, the thinking process that leads me to a conclusion, would be different, perhaps, to somebody who believes in Trump.
Yes, usually.
So,
that's because common sense. There seems to be like people common sense to their understanding of common sense. So they seem to think that it will if only everyone would use it, they'd all come to the same correct conclusion. But that's not how it actually works.
It's highly subjective.
Mm-hmm. So the problem is when people tell you to use your common sense, or good old-fashioned common sense, or bring a big dose of common sense. This frequently will not result in the same conclusions.
No, it won't. So the question then is, how do we bring people who have very differing views about the world, how it should be run, how different people, basically we all have very different views about how things should be done.
Yeah.
How can we then bring people with these varying views, these differing views, together to a more common belief, a common understanding?
A lot more critical research and critical thinking, maybe, in order to hopefully understand the other person's point of view, and also not just the why did they think that was true, but how did they get to that conclusion. Because frequently, if they common sense it, they'll just drop straight to the conclusion. They might not know how they got to their conclusion, and they might not know exactly why, because they might not. Maybe they had their intuitive thought process had factored something in. In other cases, it might not have factored anything in. In some cases, people can manage to intuit or common sense their way to a conclusion and then they think about it, and then they realise, wait, I know that's not actually correct, because they know the knowledge, but it was not applied when they common sensed it.
So is it about, perhaps we have to take a position of humility, and all of us reflect on our thought process and be systematic in the way we come to a conclusion?
I suppose that would work. Systematic. Or just be aware that just because your common sense gave you confidence and certainty that you're correct, that doesn't necessarily mean you are correct. Because one problem is that you can common sense your way on almost any subject. The trouble is, your common sense is going to be less accurate if you're trying to common sense it on a subject that is outside your training or life experience or expertise or stuff like that.
Yeah, you touched on something very key, I think, in that we being very attached to the idea that your conclusion, your idea is correct. But it's quite wise to be open to changing your mind, being open to learning and seeing things from a different point of view. I think that's really key to us working together better as a society, global society.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like Ben Carson. Do you know who Ben Carson is?
Oh, we're wrapping up now. Who's Ben Carson? 4 seconds.
US presidential candidate.
Okay.
He can common sense on surgery, okay, but when you asked about things like pyramids or his luggage, it's not as accurate.
All right. That's great talking to you.
All right.